The call came on a burner phone that only 3 people had the number for, 2 of whom were dead. That left Wyatt. His voice, thin and crackling like autumn leaves, was a ghost from a past I tried to keep buried. "Mark," he rasped, the connection humming with the vast, empty distance between his retirement cabin in the Sierras and my safe house in Nevada. "Got something for you. Something that smells like your kind of trouble." I was cleaning a silver inlaid knife, the metal cool against my palm. "I'm not in the business anymore, Wyatt." "The hell you aren't," he coughed. "You're the only one left in the business. Listen, Trinity Hills. You know it." I did. An old research hospital tucked away in the mountains, shuttered in the 80s after a so-called chemical spill. The government had disavowed it, and the locals had turned it into a ghost story to scare their kids. "What about it?" I asked, my thumb tracing the etching of a wolf on the blade's hilt. "It ain't as dead as they say. I've been hearing chatter on the old ranger frequencies, folks camping nearby reporting screams at night. Not animal screams, Mark. Not human either. Something in between." He paused, and I heard the clink of a glass Wyatt was drinking again. Then, 2 weeks ago, a Forest Service patrol picked up multiple thermal signatures underground. Big ones, moving. They wrote it off as geothermal activity. Idiots. I stopped polishing the knife. My own internal thermostat seemed to drop a few degrees. And 2 kids went missing up there 3 days ago. Urban explorers, the sheriff called them. Drove a beat-up van. They were live-streaming their little adventure when the feed cut out. No one's seen them since. That wasn't the part that hooked me. It was what he said next. The last thing on their video, just before it went black. One of them was shining a flashlight on a wall. There was a reflection in some old, broken glass. The kid's face in the glass. It wasn't his. My knuckles went white around the knife. I didn't need to ask what it looked like. I knew. I'd seen it before, seared into my memory since I was a boy, the rippling, distorted features. The too wide smile. The eyes that were just dark, hungry pits. The mark of a false face. "I'm on my way," I said, and hung up before he could reply. The change was already beginning. It started as a scent, but not one my human nose could detect. It was a deep, primal signal in my blood, a smell I could taste on the back of my tongue. I called it the transition scent. The coppery tang of a coming bleed. The static charge of old wiring just before it shorts. The earthy rot of a freshly turned grave. It was the precursor to the fury, the pain, and the power of the shift. It was the smell of the wolf stirring inside me. I packed my gear with practiced efficiency. My heavy-duty rucksack contained rope, climbing harnesses, a military-grade first aid kit, and silver-laced munitions for my custom Sig Sauer. My grandfather's hunting knife went into the sheath on my belt. I pulled on a pair of rugged cargo pants and a dark Henley, clothes that could withstand tearing. As I drove my worn-out pickup truck toward the mountains, the memories came unbidden, clawing their way to the surface. I saw my family's compound, nestled in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. I saw the night the false faces came. They wore the faces of friends, of neighbors, of delivery drivers. They walked among us smiling, until the moment they struck I remembered my father, the Alpha, holding the line as their faces melted away to reveal the horrors beneath. Pale, elongated limbs, jaws that unhinged like snakes, and eyes that held a chilling alien intelligence he'd bought me time to escape. His final howl a promise of vengeance I was now bound to keep. They had wiped out my entire clan, leaving me the last of a bloodline that stretched back through centuries. The sun was setting as I reached the turnoff for Trinity Hills. The air grew thin and cold. The road became a gravel track, Then, little more than a pair of ruts in the dirt, I parked my truck a half-mile from the facility, concealing it in a dense grove of pine trees. The rest of the way, I went on foot. The hospital parking lot was a concrete graveyard of cracked asphalt and skeletal trees. In the fading light, I saw them. Fresh tire tracks, cutting through the years of dirt and grime. They were from a van. The missing kids. Someone else had been here too. The tracks were overlaid by the heavier, wider tread of what looked like an armored vehicle. It had come and gone recently. I found a vantage point on a ridge overlooking the sprawling complex Trinity Hills was a brutalist nightmare of concrete and dark glass, a monument to forgotten science. Most windows were shattered, dark mouths gaping at the twilight sky. But as I watched, a flicker of light caught my eye. 3rd floor, east wing. I raised my binoculars, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. A figure stood in one of the intact windows, its back to me. It was just a silhouette, a person-shaped shadow. Then it turned. For a fraction of a second, I saw a face. A young man, maybe one of the missing explorers. He looked pale, lost. My stomach clenched. But then he turned his head slightly, and the angle of the setting sun caught the glass just right, the reflection. In the window's reflection, it wasn't a man's face looking back. The image was warped, twisted. The skin seemed to peel back from a frame of long, needle-like teeth. The neck was too long. The eyes were multifaceted like an insect's, glowing with a faint, predatory light. The reflection held its gaze for a moment, a true face staring out of a false one, and then it was gone. The transition scent flooded my senses, sharp and overwhelming. The hunt was on. I bypassed the main entrance, a cavernous maw of shattered glass and debris. Amateurs went through the front door. I circled the perimeter, my senses on high alert. The air was thick with the scent of decay and damp earth, but underneath it, something else. Something sterile and wrong. A low, persistent hum vibrated through the soles of my boots, a bass note that felt deeply out of place in this derelict ruin. A service entrance on the north side, almost completely consumed by a curtain of ivy, was my way in. The lock was old and rusted, but it wasn't broken. It had been recently oiled. I pulled a set of tension wrenches and picks from my belt pouch. The tumblers gave way with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. The door opened into a maintenance corridor. The hum was stronger here, a palpable thrum that seemed to emanate from the very concrete beneath my feet. The generators were running. This place wasn't abandoned. It was dormant. A predator waiting patiently in its lair. My flashlight beam cut a path through the darkness, illuminating walls stained with decades of grime and moisture. But the stains couldn't hide everything. Faded diagrams were stenciled onto the concrete, depicting complex molecular structures. The labels were mostly gone, but I could make out fragments. Iris H13 antigenic recombinant. Below one diagram, a black stamp had been messily painted over, but the indentation remained. I traced the letters with my finger. DARPA, Department of Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. This wasn't just a hospital, it was a black site. A metallic tang hit the back of my throat, sharp and familiar. Blood. Old blood mostly, but there was a fresher, coppery note mixed in. It was woven with another scent. Not quite chemical, but artificial. The crisp, sterile charge of a high-voltage current. The scent of the air after a lightning strike just feet away. It was a smell of unnatural power. I moved deeper, my boots making no sound on the gritty floor. I passed a series of offices, their doors hanging open, papers were scattered everywhere, turned to pulp by years of humidity. But in one room, a bank of security monitors sat on a long desk, their screens dark. I ran a hand over the console. It was dust-free. My fingers found the power switch. With a low buzz, the monitors flickered to life. One by one, most showed static, but 4 of them displayed grainy black and white images from different parts of the facility. A long, empty hallway, a sterile-looking laboratory, a cavernous basement room filled with machinery, a stairwell. All of them were still, silent, and empty. Or so it seemed to a human eye. I let the wolf look out. I relaxed my focus, letting my vision shift, attuning it to movement and heat. The world swam for a moment, the edges blurring, and then I saw it. On the monitor displaying the long hallway, the one that looked completely deserted, something was moving. It wasn't visible as a solid object. It was a distortion, a heat shimmer in the shape of a man, but it moved with a loping, unnatural gait. As I watched, another distortion joined it from a side corridor, this one lower to the ground, scuttling like an insect. They were invisible to the camera's lens, but not to me, not to what I was. My blood ran cold. The technology here, the cameras, couldn't see them. They were ghost signals, heat signatures without a physical form the machines could register. A perfect camouflage. A red light on the console blinked rhythmically. Active recording. Someone was watching. Someone knew this place was occupied, both by me and by the things that haunted it. The staff from the armored vehicle. A hidden remnant of the original project. I stared at the monitor, at the empty hallway teeming with invisible predators. I'd come here thinking I was hunting a single creature, maybe 2, that had taken the missing students. A lone wolf hunting its monstrous prey. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a hunting ground. It was a nest, a colony. And I had just kicked the door, and the low hum of the generators suddenly sounded like a purr. I drew my Sig Sauer, the weight of it a small comfort in the sudden, crushing vastness of my mistake. The metallic scent in the air was stronger now, and I understood. It wasn't just old blood. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse, soaked into the very walls. Waiting for the next delivery of meat, I was alone, miles from anywhere, in a tomb that was very much alive. The blinking red light on the console felt like a single malevolent eye, watching me, judging me. And somewhere in the humming, breathing darkness of Trinity Hills, the things that wore the faces of the dead were waiting. The only way down was an old freight elevator at the end of the maintenance hall. Its doors were scarred with deep gouges, as if something had tried to claw its way out. I pried them open with a crowbar, the screech of metal on metal echoing down the shaft. The air that billowed out was stale and cold, carrying the same scent of blood and charged particles from the corridors above, but thicker, more concentrated. I attached a climbing rope to a support beam and rappelled into the darkness, my flashlight beam dancing off the greasy cables. Halfway down, a sound made me freeze. A dry, rustling shuffle from the top of the elevator car, which was parked at the bottom of the shaft. It was a long, slithering sound, like a heavy sack of bones being dragged across concrete. I clicked off my light, plunging myself into absolute blackness. I hung there, suspended in the silent dark, listening. The shuffling stopped. I waited a full minute before turning the light back on, sweeping the beam across the elevator roof below. Nothing. I landed softly on the metal roof and dropped through the emergency hatch into the car. The control panel was dead, so I forced the inner doors. They opened onto sub-level A3. The world turned red. The entire level was bathed in the hellish glow of emergency lighting. The toxic crimson light warped distances and made the shadows writhe like living things. It was a place designed for panic. The air was heavy, humid, and buzzed with the energy of the humming generators, which were clearly housed somewhere on this level. I moved down a corridor lined with heavy windowless doors, each with a small placard. Specimen acclimation. Biointegration. Phase 2 observation. This was the heart of the H-13 project. Ahead, a single room was illuminated with clean, white light, a stark contrast to the crimson hallway. The door was ajar. It was a security office. My instincts screamed trap, but my curiosity was stronger. I pushed the door open, gun first. The room was empty, but it was recently occupied. A half-full ceramic mug sat on the desk, a curl of steam still rising from the black coffee within. On the console next to it, a tablet was open, its screen glowing someone had left in a hurry. I scanned the room. No signs of a struggle. They just vanished. I picked up the tablet. It was displaying a system diagnostic for the facility. My eyes immediately fell on a flashing protocol command. Decontamination sequence initiated. Below it, a description. Full facility power grid shutdown. Containment protocols voided. Magnetic locks disengaged. It was a kill switch. They were going to plunge the entire facility into darkness and unlock every single door. And then I saw the timer, ticking down in stark red digits in the corner of the screen. 2 hours, 17 minutes, 52 seconds. My heart hammered against my ribs. Less than 2.5 hours until this place became an all-you-can-eat buffet, with me as the main course. Whoever was here, the people in the armored vehicle, they weren't trying to clean this place out. They were trying to let everything loose. My gaze drifted to the bank of monitors on the wall. These were different from the ones upstairs. They showed the interiors of the containment cells. In each cell was a person. Some were curled up in a corner, shivering. Others paced back and forth, their faces etched with terror. They were alive, they were prisoners. Then I noticed the reflective panel on the back wall of one of the cells, likely a two-way mirror. In its polished surface, I could see the reflection of the man pacing inside, but the reflection wasn't a man. It was a nightmare. A pale, skeletal thing that moved on limbs bent at impossible angles. It was vaguely spider-like, with a torso that seemed too small for its sprawling limbs, and a neck that could elongate and retract like a fleshy telescope. Its human form was a projection, a psychic mask, but the mirror showed the truth. I looked at the other monitors. Every cell was the same, a terrified human prisoner, and a horrific arachnid reflection that mocked their every move. These weren't things that had taken hosts. These were the hosts. The virus H-13 didn't just create a monster. It grew one inside a living person, a parasite wearing its victim like a suit. My eyes scanned the faces of the prisoners, one by one. And then I saw him. In cell 7, a young man with a spray of freckles across his nose and a university logo on his torn t-shirt. He was staring blankly at the wall, his eyes vacant. I recognized him from a missing person flyer I'd seen a month ago. A student from a nearby college who had vanished while hiking. His name was Peter. I'd been asked to look for him, but the trail had gone cold. It hadn't gone cold. It had led here, into a cage waiting for a timer to hit 0, waiting for the monster inside him to be set free. The countdown on the tablet seemed to mock me. Each descending second, a tick of a clock strapped to a bomb. I was no longer just a hunter. I was on a rescue mission in the middle of hell, and the devil was about to turn off the lights. I left the security office. The red numbers of the countdown seared into my brain. Every step I took was measured against that relentless clock. The name on the next door I checked was different from the others. Not observation, but biosample analysis, 12B. The electronic lock was fried, the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open and the stench hit me like a wall. It was the smell of an old wound, of decay and iron and something else. Something acrid like burnt plastic. The room was a disaster. Stainless steel tables were overturned. Glass beakers and vials crunched under my boots. The walls were covered in deep, frantic scratches, long gouges in the concrete that looked like someone had tried to claw their way through solid stone. The marks weren't random. They formed strange, spiraling patterns almost like a frantic alien language. Dried pools of liquid stained the floor. It was blood, but it was jet black and had the consistency of tar. It didn't look like it had flowed. It looked like it had been violently expelled. On a desk in the corner, miraculously untouched, sat a single leather-bound journal. I picked it up, my fingers brushing away a layer of dust. The name, Dr. Lauren Birch, was embossed in faded gold on the cover. I flipped it open. The handwriting inside was a neat, precise script that grew more erratic and desperate with each passing page. The entries detailed the H13 virus, which she called the chrysalis pathogen. It didn't just mimic a host. It rewrote them from the inside out, growing a secondary predatory organism that fed on the original body while piloting it like a puppet. The human was just the cocoon. I found the last entry, dated only a week ago. Her handwriting was a barely legible scrawl. Phase transition is accelerating. The subjects are no longer entering dormancy during daylight hours. The need for a human mask is degrading. They are becoming more honest. We recorded Subject 8, voluntarily triggering what we've been calling the bloody form. It's not a defensive reaction, it's a celebration. They are shedding their skins, becoming what they were always meant to be. The increased strength, the cellular regeneration. It's beyond anything we predicted. They don't need the dark anymore. God help us, they are preparing for the sun. A cold dread, heavier and more profound than anything I'd felt before, settled in my gut. These things weren't just evolving. They were weaponizing, becoming creatures that could walk in the daylight, their monstrous forms on full display. The night had always been my advantage. The domain of the wolf, they were about to take that away. A noise cut through the silence. It was soft, almost imperceptible. A faint, wet scraping sound, like the slow twisting of a joint that badly needed oil. It came from above. I raised my flashlight, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my sternum. The beam landed on a large ventilation grate in the ceiling. One of the screws was missing, and the grate hung slightly ajar. From the dark opening, something was hanging down. It was a limb, long, pale, and segmented, like a crab's leg, but impossibly thin. It was maybe 5 feet long, ending in a single, chitinous talon that gently scraped against the wall. It wasn't moving frantically. It was moving with a slow, deliberate patience. I raised my pistol, the silver sights aligning on the jointed limb. My breath hitched. The thing was silent, its presence a suffocating weight in the small room. I expected it to lash out, to burst from the vent in a frenzy of claws and teeth. But it didn't. The limb slowly, methodically retracted back into the darkness of the vent shaft. It didn't retreat in fear. It withdrew with the quiet confidence of a predator that has already marked its prey. It wasn't attacking me because it didn't need to. It was watching. It was studying me. The entire nest knew I was here. They knew, and they were letting me walk deeper into the tomb. The scratches on the wall suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. They weren't trying to get out. They were marking their territory. and Dr. Birch's journal felt less like a discovery and more like a message, left for me to find a warning, or perhaps an invitation. Following a series of faded yellow lines on the floor, I moved from the biosample room deeper into the sublevel. The corridor opened into a vast circular chamber that felt like a desecrated church. The air was thick with the scent of chemicals, a sharp, biting odor that reminded me of formaldehyde. In the center of the room stood a dozen glass cylinders, each 10 feet tall, filled with a viscous blood-red fluid. And floating inside each one, suspended by a web of tubes and wires, was a body. It was a gallery of nightmares. Each cylinder showcased a different stage of the chrysalis pathogen's work. The first held a man who looked almost normal, save for the faint web-like patterns of black veins spreading beneath his skin. In the next, the subject's limbs were elongated, the bones clearly broken and reset at unnatural angles. Further down, a woman's rib cage had burst outward, forming a cage of jagged bone around her torso. Her face was stretched into a permanent, silent scream. The final cylinders held the finished products. Barely recognizable as having once been human, they were folded into the tight confines of the glass, their spidery limbs tucked against bodies that were more exoskeleton than flesh. They were the things I had seen in the mirror reflections, the true forms birthed from the H13 virus. My stomach churned. This wasn't a mutation. It was a replacement. The human was just the soil from which this horror grew. The walls of the chamber were covered with massive, backlit X-ray films. I walked over to one, my flashlight beam illuminating the ghostly image of a human skeleton. But underneath it, like a phantom blueprint, was a second skeleton, thin and insectoid, was wrapped around the human bones, its limbs folded and compressed, waiting. It was growing inside them, a perfect parasite, slowly devouring its host from the inside out. Until it was strong enough to emerge, I felt a surge of rage, cold and pure. For centuries, my kind had fought vampires, the mindless, blood-crazed fiends of legend. They were dangerous, but they were simple. This was something else. A calculated biological weapon. They weren't just parasites. They were an invasive species on the verge of a planetary takeover. A trail of the same black tar-like blood I'd seen in Birch's lab led from the base of an empty cylinder to a heavy service tunnel door at the far end of the room. One of them had gotten out of its tank. It was loose. Suddenly, a loud whirring sound filled the chamber. A projector on the ceiling flickered to life, casting a large, grainy image onto the opposite wall. It was a video recording. The footage showed a stark, white interrogation room. Strapped to a metal chair was one of the creatures. In its full, horrific form, it was skinnier than the ones in the tanks, clearly weakened. Two figures in hazmat suits stood just out of frame, their voices muffled and distorted. A voice from a speaker, crisp and cold, asked a question. "Subject 11, can you understand me?" The creature on the chair shuddered. Its head, a smooth, featureless orb of pale flesh with multiple deep-set eyes, tilted. When it spoke, it wasn't one voice, but many. A chorus of stolen voices, whispering and trembling in a sickening, discordant harmony. It was the sound of every person the creature had consumed, their vocal cords now instruments in a monstrous choir. "We understand," the voices whispered. "Why did you breach containment?" the interrogator asked. The creature's long, thin neck craned forward. The chorus of voices grew stronger, laced with a chilling shared amusement. "He is coming," the voices sighed, a sound like wind through a tomb. "The last of the old blood, the key, the wolf." The blood drained from my face. My breath caught in my throat. The thing on the screen slowly lifted one of its spindly arms and pointed, its long, sharp talon seeming to pierce the screen, pointing directly at the camera, directly at me. The chorus of stolen voices spoke my name. Mark. The projector clicked off, plunging the room back into crimson darkness. The only sound was the frantic pounding of my own heart. It was a trap. This whole thing was an elaborate, perfectly orchestrated trap, and I had just walked right into its center. The silence that followed the recording was heavier than any sound. They knew my name. They knew what I was. They had been waiting for me. The trail of black blood leading to the service tunnel was no longer a clue. It was a breadcrumb laid specifically for me to follow. I moved with a renewed grim purpose. As I walked down the next corridor, the facility itself seemed to come alive. New cracks spiderwebbed across the concrete walls. A low, rhythmic thudding began, echoing from behind the heavy cell doors that lined the hall. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of bodies hitting steel, growing stronger, more frantic. They were waking up. I found the door at the very end of the hall. It was different from the others, thicker, reinforced with heavy steel bars. There was no observation window. A sterile stenciled label was bolted to the front subject M14. My blood turned to ice. M for my family's name, the one I no longer used, Eller. Or maybe for Mark. The door was unlocked. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. The room inside was a stark, padded cell, empty except for a single drain in the center of the floor. But the white padding on the walls and floor was shredded, ripped to pieces, and etched into the floor, carved deep into the concrete beneath the padding, were claw marks, not the thin, sharp scratches of the creatures. These were heavier, deeper, three-pronged gouges. They were wolf claws. They looked exactly like my own. A small metal document tray was bolted to the wall next to the door. Inside was a single thin file folder. I opened it. The top page was a clinical report, subject designation M14 Eller Daniel. Genetic profile. Genetically compatible with chrysalis pathogen. Subject exhibits latent lycanthropic markers. Unique blood properties may act as a catalyst for final stage evolution of the H13 strain. Recommend proceeding with accelerated integration. I read the name again. Daniel. My older brother. He had died 10 years ago on the night our clan fell. I'd seen his body. I had buried him myself. It was a lie. They had taken him. They hadn't just murdered my family, they had harvested them. My hand shook as I flipped to the next page. It was a photograph. Grainy, black and white, taken through a security camera. Inside this very cell, a young man was on his knees, his body contorted in agony. His face was a mask of pain, halfway between human and wolf. His bones were twisting, elongating. It was the intermediate form, the painful, uncontrolled stage of a young werewolf's first few transformations. It was Daniel, and in the corner of the photo, a date stamp from 2 weeks after he had supposedly died. A wave of nausea and blinding rage washed over me. This entire facility, this virus, this nest, it was all connected to my bloodline. They hadn't just stumbled upon a werewolf. They had sought one out. They were trying to splice our DNA, our ability to transform, into their own parasitic existence. My brother had been their lab rat. And the final page of the report confirmed my deepest fear. Conclusion. Subject M14's bloodline is the missing component. A direct infusion from a primary relative, preferably an alpha strain, is required to stabilize the bloody form for solar exposure and unlock its full regenerative potential. The subject, Mark Eller, has been successfully lured to the facility. Prepare for live specimen extraction. They didn't just want to kill me. They needed me alive. My blood was the key to their final evolution. To creating an army of day-walking monsters, my brother hadn't just been a test subject. He was the lock. I was the key. Behind me, in the long, red-lit corridor, a sound echoed. A loud, metallic clang. Then another, and another. It was the sound of magnetic locks disengaging. A deep, mechanical groan reverberated through the facility as, one by one, the cells began to automatically unlatch. The thudding against the doors stopped. It was replaced by the sound of hissing and the slow, deliberate scrape of claws on steel. They were coming out. The countdown hadn't just been for a power failure. It was for feeding time. The heavy steel door of the cell directly across from me buckled outward, dented by a blow from within. A spiderweb of fractures appeared in the small, reinforced window. Then, with a deafening shriek of tearing metal, the entire locking mechanism blew out and the door swung open. The thing that emerged was wearing the face of a young woman, her eyes wide with a manufactured terror. Her body moved in a horrifying, disjointed way, her limbs bending at angles that would have snapped human bones. "Help me," she whimpered, her voice a perfect imitation of fear. I raised my pistol, but hesitated. For a split second, the human part of me, the part that still remembered a world without monsters, screamed. Then her face began to swim. It wasn't a mask being taken off. It was flesh melting, flowing like hot wax. Her features ran together, the mouth stretching into a ghastly silent oval as the true form pushed its way through pale chitinous plates, broke through the skin of her cheeks. Her neck elongated with a series of wet popping sounds. I looked at her reflection in the polished steel of the doorframe there. The truth was clear. A towering, emaciated predator with a cage of external ribs and limbs that ended in razor-sharp sickles. A piercing siren blared to life, and the steady red emergency lights were replaced by strobing, disorienting flashes. The world became a chaotic slideshow of crimson and shadow. There was no more time for stealth, no more time for tactics. "All right," I snarled, the word a guttural growl that was more beast than man. "You want my blood? Come and get it." I let the wolf out. It was a cascade of controlled agony. My bones cracked and reset, lengthening, thickening. Muscles tore and re-knit themselves into powerful new configurations. Hot fur sprouted from my skin, and my teeth sharpened into daggers the world sharpened. The strobing lights no longer disorienting but painting a perfect staccato picture of my enemies, as more cell doors burst open down the hall. My senses exploded. I could smell their alien ichor, hear the clicking of their joints, taste their fear on the air. The first creature, the one that had been the young woman, lunged, its sickle-like claws aimed at my throat. I met it head-on, a blur of fur and fury. I sidestepped the attack, my own claws sinking into its pale flesh. It wasn't soft. It felt like punching a wall of dense cartilage. It shrieked, a sound that was a mix of nails on a chalkboard and human screams. Another one dropped from the ceiling, its limbs splayed out, landing silently behind me. I spun, my powerful legs launching me forward, and slammed it against the wall, my jaws clamping down on its elongated neck. The bone snapped with a satisfying crunch. Black blood, thick as oil, sprayed across my fur. The narrow corridor became a maelstrom of violence. They were fast, moving with an insectoid grace, climbing the walls and ceiling to get at me from every angle. But I was stronger. I was pure, primal force. I tore through them, a whirlwind of claws and teeth, driven by a decade of grief and a burning need for vengeance. This wasn't a fight for survival. This was an extermination. One of them managed to slash my side, a deep gash that sent a jolt of white-hot pain through my body. I roared, the sound echoing off the concrete, and backhanded it so hard its head spun completely around. It crumpled to the floor, twitching. I fought my way through a dozen of them, the floor becoming slick with their black blood and my own crimson spray. They were just soldiers, grunts. But as I dispatched the last one in the immediate area, crushing its narrow skull under my boot, I knew this was just the first wave. The shock troopers sent to test my strength. My enhanced hearing picked up a new sound, coming from deeper within the facility. It was a low, resonant vibration. A hum that was almost a chant. It was the sound of the main hive, the core of the nest, stirring from its slumber. These things I had just killed were merely scouts. The real alphas, the ones that had orchestrated this entire trap, were still waiting for me, and the timer was still ticking down. Wounded but fueled by adrenaline, I followed the trail of the escaped specimen through the service tunnel. It opened into a colossal, cavernous chamber, so vast the strobing emergency lights barely reached the far walls. This was the core of the facility. In the center of the chamber, surrounded by a web of thick cables and coolant pipes, sat a compact nuclear reactor, its surface humming with immense power. This was the source of the facility's energy. It was the heart that kept this metal beast alive. And hanging from the ceiling, suspended over the reactor like grotesque fruit, were hundreds of large, pulsating cocoons. They were made of some kind of semi-translucent organic resin, and I could see the dark, folded shapes of developing creatures within. The low, chanting hum was coming from them, a psychic thrum of anticipation. This wasn't just a nest. It was a hatchery. They were breeding an army. On a raised control platform overlooking the reactor, a single monitor was active. It displayed the decontamination countdown. 003411. 34 minutes until the reactor shut down. The magnetic locks on the hatchery failed, and this entire army was unleashed. You finally made it. The voice came from a small speaker on the control panel. It was a woman's voice, ragged and strained, but I recognized it from the journal. Dr. Birch? I called out, my voice a low growl. I scanned the shadows but saw no one. What's left of me? She replied, her voice tinged with a hysterical edge. They keep me alive. They like my mind. They like the way I think. There was a sound of a dry, choked sob. You have to understand. We didn't know we thought we were creating the next step in human evolution, a cure for aging, for disease. We used a dormant retrovirus we found in ancient DNA. We thought we were unlocking human potential.
You unlocked a plague, I snarled, stalking toward the control panel. It wasn't a plague, she shrieked, her voice echoing in the vast chamber.
It was a reversion. The virus, it didn't create something new. It unlocked something old, something that was here before us, the true inheritors of this planet. We weren't its hosts. We were just its camouflage, a disguise it wore for millennia to survive. The H13 pathogen didn't mutate them. It just reminded them of what they truly were. The cocoons above me pulsed in unison, as if in agreement. This new version, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The one they made with your brother's blood. It's stable perfect. It can withstand direct sunlight. It can regenerate from almost any wound. When that timer hits 0, The doors to the surface will open. It won't be an outbreak. It will be a replacement. I reached the control panel. The console was a complex array of switches and keys. How do I stop it? You can't stop them, she laughed, a broken, hollow sound. But you can stop the birth. The reactor. It has an emergency purge function. A deliberate meltdown. It will fuse this entire level into a solid block of glass and steel. It will sterilize the entire mountain. And you? And me? I asked, my claws resting on the console. There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, resigned. We were dead the moment we stepped foot in this place. The price of failure is high, Mr. Eller. The price of letting them win is everything. A heavy pneumatic hiss sounded from a panel on the console. A small compartment slid open, revealing a single T-shaped key, the purge key. Do it, Dr. Birch whispered. End this nightmare. Before I could reach for the key, a shadow detached itself from the ceiling above the reactor. It dropped to the floor with a heavy, wet thud. Unfolding to its full, terrifying height, it was massive, easily 12 feet tall, with 6 glowing red eyes and a long, ridged spine that ran the length of its neck. The air grew cold, and the psychic hum from the cocoons intensified. Focusing on this one creature, this was the Alpha. The Alpha stood before me, its immense frame blotting out the light from the reactor core. It was different from the others. Its movements were fluid, its form more refined, less chaotic. This was a queen, a general. The black, tar-like blood of the creature that had escaped its tank was smeared around its maw. It had devoured its own failed experiment to gain more strength. It tilted its head, and a voice slithered into my mind. Not a chorus, but a single, focused voice, woven together from stolen thoughts and memories. It was my brother's voice, but twisted, made hollow and cruel.
Hello, little brother. I've been waiting for you.
Rage, pure and undiluted, surged through me.
You are not him,
I roared, the sound of the wolf drowning out the man. I am more than he ever was, the Alpha projected, its 6 eyes staring into me. He was weak, fragile, but his blood made us strong. Your blood will make us gods. The chamber shook as all at once the cocoons on the ceiling began to tear open. A thick amniotic fluid rained down, and newborn creatures, slick and shrieking, began to unfurl their limbs. I didn't have time. I charged. The Alpha met me with impossible speed. Its claws, long and obsidian sharp, screeched against the metal floor. I ducked under a sweeping strike that would have decapitated me and drove my shoulder into its midsection. It was like hitting a brick wall. The impact sent a shock wave up my arm, but it staggered the beast. I raked my claws across its chest, tearing through the pale exoskeleton black ichor sprayed, but the wound began to seal itself almost instantly, the flesh knitting back together with an audible hiss. Regeneration Birch was right. It lashed out with its long tail, catching me in the ribs and sending me flying across the platform. I hit the railing with a sickening crunch of bone, and metal pain exploded in my side. I could feel my ribs break. You see? Daniel's voice mocked me from inside my skull. You are still just flesh and bone, we are eternal. It began to flood my mind with images, false memories. My mother's smile twisting into a look of terror. My father's final howl warped into a cry of agony. It showed me my brother not as a prisoner, but as a willing participant, smiling as they injected him with the virus. It was trying to break me, to fill me with doubt and despair. Liar! I screamed, forcing myself to my feet, the wolf's healing already starting to mend my shattered bones. From the speaker, Dr. Birch's voice screamed, The key, Mark. It's trying to distract you. Don't let it... The Alpha lunged again. This time, I was ready. I didn't try to overpower it. I dodged, letting its momentum carry it past me. As it rushed by, I grabbed the purge key from the console. It spun around, its 6 eyes burning with fury. It opened its mouth, and a high-frequency shriek erupted, so powerful it cracked the monitors on the console and made my ears bleed. The newborn creatures on the ceiling began to crawl down the walls, a tide of clicking, chittering horrors. The Alpha charged one last time, its psychic assault now a battering ram of my deepest fears. It showed me a world overrun by its kind, with me as their chained pet, the last wolf, a trophy for their new queen. Fueled by a final, desperate surge of fury, I met its charge. I didn't try to block. I ducked under its claws, jamming my left arm, claws extended, deep into the knitting wound on its chest. I pushed deeper, feeling for its core. At the same time, I rammed the T-shaped purge key into the emergency slot on the reactor's control panel and twisted it hard. Alarms blared, a final deafening wail that drowned out even the Alpha's psychic scream. A deep, groaning vibration started, the entire chamber shaking violently. The reactor core began to glow a blinding white. The Alpha shrieked. This time in real, physical pain. It tried to pull away, but my arm was buried to the elbow in its chest. My claws had found something vital. With a final, hate-filled roar, I yanked my arm back, tearing out a mass of pulsating black organs. The creature's 6 eyes went dim. It collapsed, its massive body crashing to the floor. The meltdown was beginning. I had seconds. The reactor's wail climbed to an unbearable pitch. The floor buckled beneath me, and the white light from the core bleached all color from the world. I didn't look back. I sprinted for the service tunnel, ignoring the searing pain in my side and the newborn creatures that were now writhing on the floor, disoriented by the Alpha's death. I scrambled into the tunnel just as the chamber behind me erupted. A wave of incandescent heat and pressure blasted through the opening, throwing me forward like a rag doll. The tunnel collapsed behind me, sealing the tomb forever. I crawled on, through darkness and shaking earth. The roar of the mountain tearing itself apart at my back, I burst out of a ventilation shaft on the side of the hill, gasping for air, my body battered and smoking. The entire peak of Trinity Hills was gone, replaced by a churning column of fire and black smoke that punched a hole in the night sky. The ground shuddered with aftershocks, and the forest around the facility was ablaze. I had won. I had sterilized the nest. Staggering through the burning woods, I found it lying near the collapsed tunnel entrance, miraculously blasted clear. Dr. Birch's journal. I snatched it up, its leather cover hot to the touch. It was the only proof of what had happened here, the only record of the chrysalis pathogen. As I limped away from the inferno, I flipped through the final frantic pages. My blood ran cold for the 100th time that night. Birch hadn't just chronicled the disaster at Trinity Hills. She had listed other projects. Code names and coordinates for 3 other DARPA-funded facilities scattered across the country. One in the swamplands of Louisiana, another in the remote deserts of Utah, and a third deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Trinity Hills wasn't the source. It was just one of many. I stood there watching the mountain burn, the journal clutched in my hand. This wasn't the end of a hunt. It was the beginning of a war. A quiet, hidden war that no one else knew was being fought. My family was gone. My brother was avenged in a way. All that was left for me was the mission. I swore an oath to the fire and the ghosts of my clan. I would find these other locations. I would burn them all from the face of the earth. As I turned to leave, to melt back into the shadows and begin the long journey to Louisiana, a sound cut through the roar of the fire. It was faint, almost lost in the crackling of burning pines. A soft, wet scraping sound. The slow twisting of a joint that badly needed oil. It came from the darkness of the unburned trees to my right. Something had survived. Something had escaped before the meltdown. I didn't draw my weapon, I didn't call out. I just stared into the oppressive blackness of the woods, feeling the cold, intelligent gaze of the thing that was watching me. It knew I had survived too. A low mist was rolling in, shrouding the burning trees. I pulled up my collar, the journal a hard rectangle against my chest, and walked into it. The hunt wasn't over. It had just gone global. And the wolf was on the trail.